And I just had this epiphanous moment where I went, if my father had gone to, as it was then, Palestine, instead of Australia, I could be you. I could have been you. That's me. I'm no different. The only difference between us is that I refuse to lose my humanity.
Try something with me for a second. Pay attention to your own attention, if that makes any sense. Let's keep it up. Ukraine flares up. Iran moves into frame with the next attack still hanging in the air. Markets do their thing. Leaders posture. And almost automatically something else just, I don't know, slips out of focus. Gaza, the West Bank, Israel. And no, not because the violence stopped. Because the noise somewhere else simply got louder. And that's not an accident. That's how erasure by distraction actually works in real time. Not through denial, you don't even need it, but through the replacement of one crisis with another. You don't have to convince people something isn't happening. You just have to make sure they're looking somewhere else. Which is why this conversation today matters. My guest is Carolyn Genteler, activist, longtime campaigner for Palestinian rights, and the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And I want to be careful here because that last part, it's not a credential, it's a tension. One she refuses to resolve in a comfortable way. Because what Caroline does, and this is what makes her genuinely unsettling in the best possible sense, is she refuses any shortcuts. She doesn't trade one trauma for another. She doesn't outsource her thinking to identity. And she doesn't allow history to be weaponized into immunity, which, if you think about it, is one of the most powerful rhetorical moves in modern politics. This happened to us, therefore you cannot question what we do. Caroline she just won't play that game. And look, at a time when criticism of Israel is increasingly policed, legally, culturally, psychologically, Caroline has done something deeply unfashionable. She's chosen to be visible. Visible as a Jew, visible as an anti-Zionist, visible as someone willing to get arrested, literally. And no, she doesn't enjoy it. But because, and this is key, silence has been made too easy and dissent too costly, right? When the path of least resistance is looking away, showing up becomes the radical act. So this is not a conversation about slogans. I need you to know that going in. This is about indoctrination, how it works, how it survives generations, how it distinguishes itself as safety. It's about victimhood, how it can be completely real, inherited, and still misused. And it's about a moment that most people never say out loud, but quietly feel. That instant you realize if you'd be born somewhere else, maybe just a couple of kilometers further, with a slightly different story. You might be standing on the other side of the rifle. And one of the most disturbing things Caroline says is also the simplest. That the real moral line isn't between nations or identities. It's between those who refuse to lose their humanity and those who have been trained to give it up. So while the world is being encouraged to look east, look north, look anywhere but south towards Gaza, this conversation pulls us back. Not to outrage, but to simple responsibility, to memory, to conscience. Because here's the thing, history doesn't only repeat itself through actions, it repeats through distractions. And the most dangerous moment, it's not when violence is loud, it's when it becomes background noise. So while everyone's attention is being pulled somewhere else, we are going to stay right here. And we are going to pay attention. Because that, right now, might be the most radical thing you can do. Carolyn Genteler.
Gelenter.
Gelenter, thank you.
Yeah.
So I not only got the first name wrong, also the second name. Okay. Anyway, it's a pleasure meeting you. We already had a little chat. You're a very lively person. So I'm looking really forward for this little conversation. Again, in a exceptionally freezing environment here in London. There are some issues with electricity here, but otherwise we are good. hot tea. So
Thank you.
thank you. We will survive this
Yeah.
this time.
We're not living in Gaza.
We are not living in Gaza, and you're right. You're right away jumping into it.
Yeah.
Now, before we start, I would like to kind of flesh out a little bit who you are. So, first of all, I think the key thing why we're sitting here is, do you belong to a group of children of Holocaust survivors?
I do. So it's not really a group. We come together under the banner at all the demonstrations, and there's actually 2 Holocaust survivors, child Holocaust survivors, Agnes Corrie, who you're interviewing, and Stephen Kaposh. And Agnes was a year and Stephen was 7 years old during the Holocaust. And the rest of us are either children of Holocaust survivors or grandchildren or descendants in some way. And not everybody is Jewish, interestingly. Some people's families are converted. Some people had a Jewish father or a Jewish grandfather. And some of us are Jewish and were raised Jewish. Probably the minority, actually. Me being one of those people. Yeah.
Even taking the risk that I repeat something, apologies, but I would highlight something. I would like to highlight something. And I make it very short. So I interviewed 2 survivors of the 1948 massacres in Tantura. And through a string of coincidences, I was able to interview the daughter of an Israeli soldier who actually participated in the attacks on Tantura.
Wow.
Now, the videos, also the interviews of the actual survivors had like, I don't know, 10, 15,000 views. But the interview with the daughter of the actual perpetrator in a week or so 120,000 views. So why I'm telling you this? Voices like yours are, for that very reason that I just explained indirectly, very important because they're very impacting. The moment it comes from Israel, from someone outside of the Palestinian community, the impact is just much higher.
Yeah, which makes me feel very sad.
It is.
You know, because it's like the Jewish voice is legitimate and the Palestinian voice is not. So in a way, that really made me think then. You didn't make me, I just started to think that I feel like part of the big problem of Jewish supremacy, actually. So in highlighting my voice. So it just occurred to me when you said that. Yeah.
Again, I see it as something positive in quotation marks because people like you speak out. Yeah, and this is really hopeful.
I think, I mean, having said that, and it is, you know, part of a kind of I guess it is, again, you know, highlighting a Jewish voice. But on the other hand, that's why I have kind of been going to lots of media events and things, or being happy to speak to media, because actually the Jewish voice that I represent isn't necessarily the one that gets heard in the media. And I know, because I do work with a little group of older women. The oldest is 86. I'm the youngest. I'm going to be 68 next week. And we
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Not everybody makes it that far.
No, it's absolutely true. Yeah. And especially if you live in Gaza. And we're called Jewish Peaceniks UK. And we do fundraising events, and we also do actions to highlight that not all Jewish people are Zionists. And I know that's gone to Gaza. So I know that's kind of a little good thing in the world, and all little good things add up. So that's very important to me. Yeah.
Not all Jewish people are Zionists, absolutely. No matter how Netanyahu wants to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism,
absolutely,
in order to shield Israel, also the state of Israel, of any legitimate critique there might be by labeling it anti-Semitism, whilst in reality it's anti-Zionism. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Not all Jewish people are anti-Zionist.
And actually, I think, I'm sure some of your other Jewish speakers have made the same point. I think, first of all, people don't really understand the difference between Zionism, a national state called Israel, because many Zionists are not Jewish, actually. That's where the money comes from, the Christian Zionists in America.
60 million of them.
Exactly. And then you've got the state of Israel, which is a nation state. And then you've got Judaism, which is a religion. It's also an ethnicity. I had my DNA done. I was really interested because I'm quite dark and my father was Polish Jew. So I was interested where I thought maybe after the Inquisition that Spanish Jews went to Poland, which was at the time quite welcoming of Jews. But actually it was Jews escaping the Ottoman Empire. And so then I thought maybe I had Turkish in me, but I don't. I am 99.9% Ashkenazi Jew. And that's interesting because I'm not Semitic. So Ashkenazi Jews, their heritage comes from Europe, totally. Like I think, I can't remember the exact, obviously Polish, but there was some other kind of mix in there, but it was all Eastern European, which is the beginnings of Ashkenazi Judaism. So I kind of think this whole notion of Semitism is an interesting one, actually.
Maybe you want to elaborate very briefly, Ashkenazi Sephardic.
Yeah. So Ashkenazi Jews are the kind of the European Jews, and it's a hierarchy. So German Jews are like, the top of the pile. And then you have Sephardi Jews or Mizrahi Jews. Sephardi Jews actually originally meant Jews from Spain, but it's come to mean Jews from the Middle East. Mizrahi Jews is another term for that. So actually, they're probably one of the oldest populations of Middle Eastern Jews was in sort of in terms of real historical terms, not in terms of a story that was written, which we called the Bible. They actually were in Iraq, in Babylon, what is now the rest, what's left of
Professor
modern
Avi
Iraq.
Schleim comes from
Yeah.
Iraq. I interviewed him twice.
Did you? Yeah. I haven't met him, but his wife organised a fast for Gaza for health workers, and I went along, and it was brilliant. I did a day of fasting, for Gaza. It was great. Yeah.
Ashkenazi, very, very briefly. So these are the European descent Jews.
Yeah.
And of course, they were formed quite the elite in Israel, which at the moment this kind of demography is shifting, due to
the influx of other Jews.
Exactly.
It's so interesting, right? Like, first of all, partly what I want to say is that that because Netanyahu has, and not just Netanyahu, look, Netanyahu, Trump, Hitler, they're not monsters, they're just human beings. And it's
They just made a lot of friends.
Well, they're not. They're, and people like us, not me or you, but many people, ordinary, everyday people, because of their resentments and fears, allow and support and collude and take part in making sure these people get a voice, and so they're not monsters. But Netanyahu and his followers have conflated this idea of Judaism and Zionism, and I think that is creating much more anti-Semitism that existed prior to October the 7th. And the other thing is, when you lump all Jews together, like we all believe one thing, it is in itself a form of anti-Semitism. I hesitated using the word anti-Semitism because should we particularize anti-Semitism, it is a form of racism, and it highlights that somehow Jewish racism is more important than other forms of racism. And actually, to think that all Jews think the same is in and of itself, in my opinion, a form of anti-Semitism. Have you ever heard of the joke that you put 3 Jews in a room, you get 11 opinions? Like, there are many Jewish communities. When Keir Starmer, and I can never remember the Home Secretary's name, Shamima, I can't remember her name, sorry, that's not very kind of me. But anyway, when they were going on about the attacks in Manchester, and terrible, 2 people died, one of whom was murdered accidentally by the police.
I just wanted to say, one was...
Yeah. And so, they were appealing to people not to protest on the 6th of September. And oh, no, it was October, wasn't it? It was October. And actually it was just after Yom Kippur. And like, the importance of 2 people dying and protecting the Jewish community. And I remember saying, am I not Jewish? I'm here protesting. Am I not part of a Jewish community? I don't go to a synagogue, but actually, do you know, only about, I think less than 50% of Jewish people in Britain go to synagogue. And less than half of those synagogues are actually represented by the Jewish Board of Deputies. But you'd think that was the only Jewish voice. So it drives me nuts. Like, it really irritates me. And of course, when you speak to people who may not have knowingly Jewish friends or may not, meet Jewish people, they ask you questions like, a bit like, oh, you speak English, you're Australian and you speak English. I get a little bit of that occasionally, but more like, oh, you're Jewish, so you've got an Israeli passport. And you, although you speak good English, but you speak another language, don't you? And it's like, really, people really do not know the difference between being a Jew, being an Israeli, and being a Zionist. So Netanyahu and all of those who follow him, and Smotrich and all of them, have absolutely contributed to this sort of lie about what a Jew is and what anti-Semitism is. Yeah.
I think it goes way further back than that. There's a orchestrated, how shall we call it, propaganda indoctrination campaign.
Absolutely.
Going back to Ben Gurion.
Yeah, and before probably, yeah.
And before, I mean, the Zionist project had nothing to do with the Holocaust. It started in 1880, yeah.
And it's interesting you say that because, of course, after the Holocaust, Israel, the new nation state, didn't want to know about the Holocaust survivors. They looked down upon them because,
they were weak.
Yeah, the image of the Holocaust survivor was this bent over, payah-wearing, kippah-wearing Jew, bent over with the furry hat and going meekly to the gas chambers. And Israel did not want to present itself that way. And people didn't start talking about the Holocaust until the Nuremberg trials. And in fact, my father was a Holocaust survivor, but I never heard his story from him. You know how I found out? Well, first of all, my mother told me after he died, but also
How old were you?
I was in my 30s when my dad died.
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
He'd never spoken about the Holocaust.
You didn't know till
I knew he was a Holocaust survivor, but I didn't know anything about his story. And I only knew about the Holocaust because I was a Zionist and I went to a Jewish youth group. And it was aligned with the socialist kibbutz movement. It was called Habonim, which means the builders. That gives a bit away. And it was there that I learned all the stories of the Holocaust. So I knew that my father was a Holocaust survivor, but sadly, I wished I'd asked him before he died. But actually, I didn't really know anything about him. I'm still trying to find out about my dad's family. And where I knew about the Holocaust and where I got very kind of, if you like, self-righteous and, all this, got really caught up in the Holocaust was through going to Habonim. And every weekend we'd have meetings where you did Israeli folk dancing and you learned Israeli folk songs, and we had a talk. And we were shown all sorts of films about the Holocaust. And I think back to it, I was like 13 or 14 watching these films about the Holocaust. And of course, why do they do that? Because it's part of the indoctrination about why you should go to Israel. Yeah. But my father never talked to me about it. And people, there were obviously some Holocaust survivors who did talk about it constantly, but many did not, and particularly those, I guess, none of my friends, not many of them had parents who were Holocaust survivors. Most of them had either escaped or were second generation, but I don't think that, I think it was mixed. I think some people talked about it and lots of people didn't talk about their experiences because, my father went out to Australia because he wanted to get as far away from Europe as possible. So he never spoke Polish ever again. We didn't grow up hearing Polish. And he wouldn't speak Polish. He wouldn't buy anything that was made in Germany. But he would never speak about the Holocaust ever. I never heard him speak about it. Interesting.
You said you were a Zionist. Till about which age? About?
No, not only was a Zionist, I've told this story before, but I have to tell it because I think it's really funny.
Please do.
So Lots of people, that's another stereotype that all Jews are rich. But if you've ever been to Israel, you will know there are lots of poor Jews, but there are all over the world. There are here too. There are working class Jews, or if you can still use that term, working class. But my father was a barber and my mother worked as an embroideress in a factory. And I just knew they would never, they just didn't. Then an airfare to Israel from Australia was like, I remember it was 900 and something dollars, which was probably like the equivalent of about $9,000 today. It was a lot of money. And I knew that my parents just would never be able to pay that airfare. And so from the age of 13, I got a job in a nursing home and I went every weekend to serve tea and do the washing up to save the money to go to Israel. So not only was I a Zionist, I was like, to date, I don't know, but I suspect I'm the only person who's ever saved their own money to go to Israel to make what's called a Shnat Hakshara, which is a year of preparation. So you do a year on a kibbutz, and then the idea is that you make Aliyah, you go up to Zion, you go back, kind of, I'm not sure if I can pronounce this word, you know what I mean, preach about, I can't remember the word, I can't say the word at the minute, but you preach about Israel to other young people in the youth group, and then say 2 or 3 years later, you might go back and make Aliyah to the state of Israel.
So you paid for yourself.
Yeah.
Whilst, I mean, I know that now, and I don't know how long it goes back, of course, Israel funds this and organized this on a structural way. And I interviewed Professor Nurit Peled El-Hanan. She's the sister from Nico Peled, whom I also interviewed. And she spoke about pornography of evil. Yeah, coming back to those ghastly movies that they show those 12 to 14-year-old young people in order to indoctrinate them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And so, I don't know, I'm sure people did get kind of stories from their parents, but that's where I became very passionate about kind of the injustice of what happened to Jews. I will say, in my defense, injustice became a bit of a kind of journey for me. Like, I have been involved in many different campaigns, and including when I was 14 going on an anti-Vietnam War march. So my parents weren't political, but I had friends whose parents were, so I went along with them. So I guess a theme, which is, you know what, it's an interesting theme because if you've got injustice, you've got justice, and then it applies a victim in there, doesn't it? And an oppressor. And a big theme for Jews is victimhood.
Absolutely.
We are the art of victimhood.
Till today. So whenever this card can be drawn, it's
absolutely. And in fact, Netanyahu and those that support him are the biggest gaslighters of all time. So, I mean, it truly is amazing to smash Gaza to smithereens, to starve the population, to murder babies, and still come out the victim in that. That's pretty clever, don't you think? I mean, really astonishing. And of course, many Jewish people who support Zionism today and the state of Israel, it's like that. That's how they see themselves. They see themselves as victims.
Before we continue, a quick reality check. If you're watching this here, there's a decent chance you were not meant to. My reach on YouTube has virtually collapsed. Not gradually, but mechanically. From 6-figure views to a couple of thousand on a good day. The same pattern that ended my Twitter X account is now visible here. Throttled first, suspended later. And no, it's not paranoia, it's platform behavior. I have hundreds, virtually hundreds of viewer comments confirming it too. That's why the safest place to follow my work is on Substack. No algorithmic muting, no silent erasure. Direct signal, direct audience. If you want continuity, not just these clips, join me there. Now back to the interview. There's one word that you said that I kept in reserve here in my mind, because you said, in my defense, right?
Okay.
First of all, you don't need to defend yourself, because it's absolutely, how shall I say this? looking through the lens of a behavior analyst, I do understand the psychological mechanisms, plural, that led you to become a Zionist, right? There is no surprise there. Israel's machinery is not only very sophisticated, and it gets more sophisticated by the day, thanks to social media, but it's also intergenerational. Yeah. So there's a lot, from grandparents to parents to.
Absolutely.
Yeah? So it's not surprising. And sometimes I ask myself, if I would have been born in Israel or would have a certain past, like father or parents, Holocaust, so, yeah. And the thing is that I absolutely do understand, for example, your parents or your father coming out of or surviving a concentration camp. I completely understand the sentiment. So for safety, basically, it's one of the on the pure, it's one of the prime needs of humans, safety, right? So I understand that. But if you then jump fast forward to today, to justify what happens today with that need for safety from 75, 80 years ago, this is where I do not, follow this line of thought.
You and me both. And if you can find out a way to explain it. So the other night, I was at a demonstration that Jewish anti-Zionist Action organised with Palestine Pulse outside an event that was held in a synagogue to encourage British Jews to make Aliyah. I mean, my bet is that they were selling properties in settlements. I'm absolutely certain. And
Hold that thought.
yeah. And so the police moved the demonstration right away from the synagogue, hundreds of yards away, so you couldn't hear anything at all from the protesters. But very soon, a group of Zionists, I hate using these terms, a group of very angry people who support Israel, gathered on the other side of the road. And it was, both sides, there were young Palestinian people there, and, they weren't necessarily used to organising that way, and there was lots of anger and aggression on both sides. But, I'm not Palestinian. It's upsetting enough to watch what's going on when you're me, white, somewhat privileged, etc. I'm Jewish, but to actually be a Palestinian and watch what's going on in Palestine. But the people, so I'm not saying everybody was perfect angels, but the people that were gathered on the other side of the road who had obviously mobilised, and even though the police had moved the demonstration hundreds of metres away from the synagogue, but they came and gathered on the other side. They were really wicked, the things that they were saying, and also childish. Like, it was like being in a playground spat. Some of the things, I can't even remember, it was so ridiculous, some of the things they were calling out, but nasty. And I just remember standing there like this, thinking, what is going on? Where is that coming from? Like, we were clearly Jews. We had a big banner. There were some Palestinians there, but there was also a big banner that saying that we were Jews, anti-Zionist Jews, but Jews, nevertheless. People were wearing, there's a big queer Jewish community that are quite religious, and they were wearing kippot and so on, and which is the head skull cap. And there's other Jews on the other side of the road screaming the most, well, it like scenes out of Nazi Germany, actually. And I was just stood there thinking, what is going on? What is in your heart? Like, I get crimes of passion, but you don't know us. And some of us are Jews, and not that should matter, but, like, you profess to be really, Judaism is important to you, and, and yet it was wicked. And I genuinely mean that. I just don't, I just don't get it, really. I thought I did, but I don't, because it's really deep and really fear-based and really wicked. It's wicked, some of what they're saying and doing. It's wicked. Some guy, one of them, kind of stood on our side of the road, and the police were there. They were completely surrounding us, and a few of them were on the other side. And a couple of these other Jews came up, and one of them had this big Alsatian on a lead, and he let him loose to run around among us. And I said to the police officer, can you grab that dog? Like, there might be people here who are frightened of that dog. It's a big dog and it's running between people's legs. And, you know, the owner had deliberately wound him up, and he didn't. He just was sort of, you know, being very conciliatory. But, you know, it was nasty, nasty. I don't know, you're the analyst. Where does that come from?
I put it back on indoctrination. Yeah, they really believe, I mean, that's the tragedy. They really believe they are on the right side. Noam Chomsky told me they will blow up the world, but who cares? God is on their side. This is virtually what he said to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's the same stuff about Trump supporters and, you know, whatever you think of the climate. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
And despite the facts that are in front of your face, you can't see the facts because your belief overpowers.
Confirmation bias, all these kind of things.
It's shocking, actually. I never thought I mean, look, don't get me wrong, I've been involved in different things for many years. And I remember once I did spend quite a lot of time in the West Bank.
Really?
Yeah,
When was
yeah.
that?
I've done all sorts of weird and wonderful things, actually. I went to Iraq to break the sanctions. So I'd been a Zionist, and then I wasn't.
Yeah, we stopped this conversation. So how long, till what point in your life?
Well, I came back. So I went to Israel and I met my husband on kibbutz, and he was from a Moroccan Jewish family, actually. And in Israel, back in must have been the 60s and 70s, they had this program for what they used to call delinquent boys, where he had lots of trauma, I think. So his parents had been one of the group of people that came over from Morocco because the synagogues were being blown up. By now, we know it was the Zionists blowing up the synagogues to get people to come over.
Egypt, Iraq.
Exactly. And they wanted them to do the shit work because they were Sephardi Jews. Yeah. And my father-in-law came over with his wife and Hananya, my husband at the time, who was 3, and a younger sister. And they couldn't get work because, you know, the racism and discrimination was appalling. They were a very well-to-do family, so he wasn't like a labourer or something, which is what they wanted. And so for 10 years, they were just kind of living off their savings. And I think things were very difficult, and they lived in a tiny little pokey flat, 7 kids in the end, in a tiny 3-bedroom flat in a very poor part of Tel Aviv. And all of my husband's families had some kind of issue. And anyway, I guess I don't know what happened to my husband, exactly what happened, but he ended up on kibbutz when he was 13. And there were a few of those young men who lived on kibbutz. But when I started going out with him, it was really interesting because people said to me things like, why are you going out with I'm just trying to remember the word there's a particular word for black in Israel, which has escaped me. And I'd go, what are you talking about? You know, and you're Ashkenazi. What are you doing with a, you know, black guy kind of thing? He wasn't black, but he was Moroccan. So I remember thinking about that. And actually, I had a prestigious job as a volunteer on the kibbutz. I was milking cows, and I got fired from the cow shed because I was going out with this Sephardi Jew. So the kibbutz was a Romanian kibbutz. It was an Ashkenazi kibbutz, and they had these kids some of whom were European, but many of whom were Sephardi. These kids who were delinquents. I mean, he was 20-something by then. He'd grown up on the kibbutz or spent his teenage years there. And so anyway, I ended up going back to Australia, and then I went back to Israel and we got married, and I lived in Tel Aviv for about 18 months. And then I was a bit naive, I think, and a bit sort of unconscious, as maybe you are. Well, maybe not young people today, but I was then in the 70s. And I felt, I couldn't tell you why, I couldn't have described it then, but I remember feeling uncomfortable. And partly now I would say it was because I'd grown up in a kind of inner city suburb of Sydney. And Australia's pretty easygoing. I mean, maybe not for Indigenous people, but for white people like me, yeah, it's a pretty easy place to live. And suddenly I was thrown into this world of tension and aggression and little old ladies fighting to get on the bus kind of thing. And again, racism, in my face racism. Like, what are you doing going at work? I got a job and people would ask me, why are you with a black man? Really, this is the land of the Jews where we're meant to feel safe and equal. And so I convinced him to come out to Australia. He was also finding it difficult to get work after he left the kibbutz. And so he came out to Australia, and then we were there for a while, and I had a child. And then I guess our paths went very different ways. He became more and more kind of conservative, and I became more and more kind of progressive in my outlook. I mean, it was the 70s, so eventually we separated, and he met an Israeli woman in Sydney, and they came back to Israel. He died last year. He's been married 7 times, actually. He was married. But it's also, so after I left him, I guess that was a long way of saying, I then had a child and I needed to do something with my life. So I went to teachers' college and I got involved in student politics, and I got very further in feminist politics and then Indigenous politics, and I got further and further away from my Jewish friends who I'd grown up with and been very entrenched in Habonim, and had a lovely teenage years with a big group of friends, always had a boyfriend. It was not like most teenagers, it's a very angst time, but it was a lovely time. And then I got more and more away from that and got kind of into a different way of being in the world. And I stopped I didn't really think about it anymore. And I wouldn't have even described myself then as a non-Zionist, because I probably wasn't conscious enough. And also, I think I probably would have still been, at that point, still quite defensive about anything to do with Israel. But then I came over here. So I took my daughter backpacking. I'm a bit of a weirdo, sorry. I should have warned you about this. I took my daughter backpacking for a year when she was 10. So I took her out of school and we went backpacking, for which she's never forgiven me. And no, we've got a great relationship now. And then we ended up here, and because my mother was a British Jew, I could live here, and and also I wanted to be here because I think there's very limiting political opportunities in Sydney, and I was really interested in my 30s in kind of exploring different political
So till your
situations.
30s, you still kind of
I probably didn't even think about Israel. I'd just sort of grown, and of course, I wasn't aware of what was going on. Even then, of course, there were terrible things going on, but I wasn't really following it. I didn't kind of pay any interest to it, I think, until I came over this side of the world. And then it's much more in your face, because, I mean, it is now Palestine, in Australia, there's lots of Jewish and other groups organising. But I guess at that time, support for Palestine as opposed to Israel was not a big thing. There were people, but I wasn't really part of it. It was only when I came here, and because we're much closer to that part of the world, it was much more sort of in my remit of political circles. But I still didn't kind of get engaged. And it wasn't until I went to a few, the Palestine Solidarity Committee was nowhere near as big as it is now, and they had a women's group, and I went to a few of those meetings. I listened to some speakers talk about their experiences at the airport. We're talking about the 90s now, even then. And then I got in my early 40s, before that, in my late 30s, I got engaged with a group of women organising around Iraq, British and Iraqi women. And I decided to go to Iraq to break the sanctions. So I did that.
I understand now. With a husband, that would be difficult.
Well, I wasn't, he hadn't played a part in my life for a very long time, but I think just all that, as you called it, indoctrination, meant that it was just easier not to think about Israel. So I could get engaged in other things, but not Israel. And or did you mean because he was sort of Middle Eastern that was kind of my draw to Iraq? What were you thinking?
I was more thinking there would be less of an incentive of, I mean, this is not only an adventure, it's like there's risk involved.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, there's always risk involved
yeah,
when you go to places because it was already Iraq was under
yeah,
sanctions. Saddam Hussein hadn't been deposed yet.
yet, yeah.
But I always feel, I mean, I'm not, would I describe myself as a feminist? I think feminist politics have really influenced me, but I hate all these East words, actually.
Mm,
I'd like to get rid of identities, all identities,
mm,
which is ironic because, of course, as somebody who's never played on being Jewish or really kind of necessarily even told people when I've been engaged
mm,
in different political things, suddenly it's become very important to me to identify as a
yeah,
Jew. Anyway, I went to Iraq, and then when I came back, I I think it was not long before the second Intifada, and suddenly it was all over the news, and I felt I had to kind of open my eyes. So, it was easy because the international solidarity movement had just started up and it gave you the structure. It was very easy to go. You could go for 2 weeks and experience, um, being in Palestine and helping to kind of witness
mm,
and so on. And so I went in my Christmas holidays and I went off, and then that was it. I was that from probably 2001. That's been my main issue of engagement is Palestine, because once you've seen what you've seen, you cannot unsee it. And actually, I have a friend staying with me who's a big activist, Angie Zelter, who's on her fifth arrest today as we speak. And
sorry?
Angie Zelter is on her fifth arrest for the Defend Our Juries action today. She went down today to get arrested. That's the fifth time she's done it. Lots of people have done it 4 or 5 times. I've only done it twice. And I was telling her this morning, she started. She's a very big anti-nuclear campaigner, but she started a group called the International Women's Peace Service, and it was based. It was a human rights NGO based in a rural part of Palestine, and it was kind of easier to organise as women and live with women because in rural Palestine at that time, it was very conservative. So you wouldn't have, it's tricky with not in the cities with men and women together. So I was saying to her, I remember an incident when I went out. So then I went out with ISM and then I joined the International Women's Peace Service and I went out for 3 months and I took time off work and I went out. And even then, so we're talking about 2003, maybe 2002. I remember one night there was a village down the road from where we were based, and somebody called us and said the Israeli army the IDF have invaded, and could you come? And it was pitch black, and we didn't have a car or anything. And the taxis wouldn't come and get us. We had friendly drivers, but they wouldn't come and get us. Too dangerous. So now I think, how did we do that? We must have been nuts. There were 4 of us, women. We walked in pitch black about a mile down the road to the village, Marda, and we walked into the village and it was pitch black. And we suddenly looked up and there were all these people on the roof of their houses kind of looking at us and wondering who we were. And so we said, we're from the International Women's Peace Service. So we walked, they kept saying, they're here, they're here. So they kind of gave us directions to where the IDF were. And when we got there, there were about 10 boys between the ages, I'll never forget this, of about 8 to 16, blindfolded, handcuffed, kneeling on the stones in the middle of the night. So this stuff, the reason I tell that story is because this has been going on a very long, long time. And I can tell you endless stories of being stopped, because we always travelled with Palestinian transport, being stopped at checkpoints on boiling hot days or in winter at freezing cold days at the whim of some 18-year-old soldier. And that was what was really incredible because, they have a lot of autonomy in the IDF, or the IOF, as we like to call it, the Israeli Offensive Army. And they, at the whim of an 18-year-old who might be leading a platoon, they can just put up a checkpoint, a mobile checkpoint, and stop you for however long they want from getting through to where you need to go to work, or maybe pick your child up or get to the doctors or the hospital. They don't care. They just stop you. And for hours on end. And I remember saying to some of the Palestinians who'd gotten out of the bus, aren't you angry? I'm ready to, do something violent. And they said, it doesn't help. What can we do? And that was a really, leading back to what I was talking about, these people that are so, I can't even, wicked. I remember something that really was very powerful for me is when I was on a demonstration one day, and there was lots of tear gas, and I thought, I really don't want to be tear gas. There was rubber bullets and all sorts. So I went to the front, and because I was clearly not Palestinian, I actually got right up to the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers. And I remember looking at a soldier like I'm looking at you, and I just had this epiphanous moment where I went, if my father had gone to, as it was then, Palestine, instead of Australia, I could be you. I could have been you. That's me. I'm no different. The only difference between us is that I refuse to lose my humanity. I don't see you as a monster. I don't see Adolf Hitler as a monster. I see you as a human being. What you're doing is wrong, but you're still human. And that's the difference between us, because you look at me and you see me as a monster, a monstrous traitor to my people. And that's the only difference between us, that I refuse to not see anybody's humanity, really. And I don't think, that young kid with his thousands of pounds worth of weaponry saw me that way. He just saw me as this sort of evil incarnate traitor. And actually, it was even worse if you were Jewish, because I used to say I'm Jewish, but it was worse than being Palestinian. It's worse, isn't it? Because you're a traitor. So I think that's really important because, it's easy to see things as sides. And, and I think there are universal truths. I think there are some rights and some wrongs. But I think it's very important. I hold that, and I hold it within a contradiction of also saying there are rights and wrongs, but nothing is binary either. And the problem with seeing things in a binary way is that it leads to dehumanizing people. So I kind of feel like you can say something's wrong and you can recognize that person's humanity at the same time, because we all make mistakes, don't we? I'm far from perfect. Ask my daughter. So, it's hard to hold, but we have to learn to hold contradictions, I think, because life under capitalism is full of contradictions. And so, I profess to be conscious about climate and the corporations. I use Amazon. I've got a Kindle. Life is full of contradictions, isn't it? So anyway, I've gone way off on a tangent. I can't remember the original question, but hopefully that answered it somewhere in there, Thomas.
So you said something before, they're selling property in the West Bank or something. Yeah. So I spoke to Rich Siegel.
Uh-huh.
He lives in the UK. I forgot now the town where he's living in, but he kind of undercover went in a number of synagogues in America where they sell actual property in the West Bank and in
Brave
Gaza.
man.
I'm not sure. I forgot now. Is it? I know in the West Bank, but not sure about Gaza. But in the West Bank, so they're selling actual property in the West Bank. Yeah. So much for what Trump. No, we will not. No, Israel will not. Take over the West Bank. That was most recently,
And well, you only have to open the news to know what's going on in the West Bank. They smashed Jenin again to pieces. look what's going on in Hebron and has been. I've been to Hebron. Have you ever been
No.
to? Oh my God. It's, unbelievable, unbelievable. But this is not new, I mean, it's
75 years.
accelerated
Yeah.
but, even I don't remember it being like that in the 70s, but certainly by the 80s and 90s after the first Intifada, it was that gave Israel an excuse they were looking for. Look, how can it be, Thomas, that Israel, who actually makes their money from selling surveillance, not from arms,
High tech.
yeah,
High tech.
high tech,
Yeah.
how did they not know about October the 7th? Of course they knew.
Now you open the can of worms.
You'd have to, I'm really sorry, I just cannot. Of course, I've had no proof. Who am I? I'm just the ordinary, Joanne Blow. I'm nobody. I'm absolutely just an ordinary human being who, because of my history, feels passionate and is lucky enough to be able to engage in ways that other people can't because they've got children to raise or whatever. Or they're so, people get very frightened. And I don't know why. I should be more fucked up than I am, actually, given my history. But I'm very lucky. I'm not anxious. I'm not a particular, who can't? Of course, we all feel anxious under capitalism. It's impossible. I worry about my old age when I leave work. How will I pay my bills and so on? But I'm not really an anxious person. And I'm pretty easygoing and very optimistic. But I'm just an ordinary person, but I cannot believe that anybody would not realize that Israel did not know what was going to happen on October 7th. And anyway, October the 7th was not a beginning. It was an interruption in what has been a long history of murder, persecution, oppression, racism, all those words and more, in the history of Palestine.
October the 7th, I said it on a number of occasions, was a God-sent gift for Netanyahu.
Yeah.
We know that there are a couple of things, and this is not opinion. I mean, it's published in Hierarchies. Egypt warned Israel twice prior to the attacks.
Of course they did.
They had their own guards on the fence to Gaza. The women soldiers warned them something's going to happen.
Yeah.
There was no action. They're all dead.
Yeah.
And I'm a paraglider by accident. Yeah.
Are you?
So I can tell you one thing. This is a skill you have to learn. This guy went with motorized paragliders, which is it's more tricky. So where did they learn that?
Yeah, good point. That's really
not
interesting.
in Gaza.
No.
They would have seen that.
Yeah. And, there's all sorts of who would really know, right? But, there's all sorts of theories about allowing it to happen because it's a left-wing kibbutz and they didn't know about the festival. I have come to the conclusion that I'm open to anything being the truth because we just don't know. And when, years after an event, things are opened up and secret papers are opened up and you realise, what happened in South America, in many South American countries, in Australia. I mean, I don't know if you know the story of Gough Whitlam, who was the first, I was slightly too young to vote when he came in. And we'd had a equivalent of a Tory government, very conservative, very, up the bum of the British state government for years and years and years. And it was the first time a Labor government had come in with really progressive ideas. He brought in divorce laws and pensions for single parents and all sorts of really progressive kind of laws and things, and funding. There was plenty of money. And at the same time, he sent troops and supported American troops in East Timor. So he wasn't exactly a socialist, or I don't even like that word, but, he wasn't a totally left-wing radical person. I mean, he was lefty, but not radical. He was a parliamentarian, he was the prime minister. And basically what happened is he said to the Americans have a big spy base in Australia called Pine Gap. It's very famous. And the previous government had made a financial arrangement of rent of one peppercorn for the use of that land and that base. And what Gough Whitlam wanted was he didn't want to close the bases down. He just wanted them to pay rent. He said, if you're going to be here, that's great. We want you. We welcome you. But you have to pay us rent. And so we now know the CIA ran a covert campaign, and I even remember the newspapers, which was when newspapers were black and white, they had red headliners saying "Reds under the beds, Gough Whitlam is supporting communists." And as a result of that, the opposition party, Conservative, blocked his supply budget. And so the council, I think it's called the Council General, who is the Queen's representative in Australia, because we're still part of the Commonwealth, sacked Gough Whitlam because he couldn't run a government, because he couldn't get the supply budget through. And that was all because of the CIA. So I believe anything. And one day we will find out all sorts of truths, won't we, that we may not be aware of now. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think you need to be a conspiracy theorist. I think there's enough stuff going on in the world not to have to be a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, but anyway, we're way off topic now, so yeah.
I heard this morning, coincidentally, that there was a demonstration in front of a court here in the UK. It was yesterday, before yesterday, I'm not entirely sure. And a journalist with the name David Lear got, let's just say, died after an altercation with a counter-protester, an Israeli counter-protester.
Oh, I think I did read about that. Was that on Monday outside of...
It must have been very recently.
Yeah, I think...
So today is Wednesday, so it might be on Monday.
Yeah. I didn't read about it probably because I haven't had time, and actually it only had a passing mention, I think, in the press.
So at the moment they say he died. They don't specify how he died. Yeah, but there was an altercation. There was an altercation between this journalist doing his work and the Israeli counter-protester, and he died. So I was wondering, because coming here, right now, this evening coming here, the subway here, the entrance to the subway was blocked. There were like, I don't know, hundreds of people on the street. I don't know exactly what's going on tonight. I do not know. But I have the feeling that there are some tensions when it comes to the situation in regards to Israel. And there is, of course, the demonstration on Saturday, coming Saturday, where you and your non-group
we'll go on the demonstration,
will participate. But before we go there is this Palestine Action Group, right?
Yeah.
Which has been made illegal. So what's the story here? Yeah.
So I guess you came across me because you saw my arrest on the Navarra media, which
AI says you do not hesitate to be arrested.
No, I don't. Well, that's not entirely true. Okay, so as you can hear, I have been engaged. I don't like that. I don't like the ist words. I don't like labels, and I don't like being put, because as soon as you say you're an activist, people think immediately they're thinking all sorts of things. Or, if you say you're a feminist or a this ist or that is. So what I would say is I'm somebody, because of my history, who cannot be a bystander. And I've chosen my issues because they resonate with me, but it doesn't mean I close my eyes to other terrible things like Sudan and so on that are going on. But I've got only so much energy to devote. And so I did think long and hard, because I've been in many campaigns. Many years ago, I've been arrested in an anti-nuclear campaign, but we weren't charged. We were just given a warning or whatever, what they call it, I can't remember. But I've always steered away from getting arrested. So I've been in protests in America, and, as soon as the police say, well, they use guns with real live bullets, as soon as they say we're going to arrest people, I'm out the door. I'm not interested in getting arrested. I'm not sure what you do it for, the purpose of it. And it unless it happened by accident, which is what happened to me on an anti-nuclear campaign, I'm not looking to get arrested, not by accident, but, I wasn't planning on getting arrested. It was spontaneous. But this time, the reason I did hesitate about being part of the Defend Our Juries Lift the Ban campaign. So Palestine Action is a group of young people. They were formed after Just Stop Oil. So you know about all the Just Stop Oil campaigners. They were the climate campaigners, and they came to people's attention. Mostly, they did a number of things, but they threw paint or soup on a painting in a gallery. They had terrible prison sentences also, treated pretty badly, but they were done under, I think, criminal damage charges. But Palestine Action are a group of young people, and I don't know if there are any Jewish people in that, but there are certainly people, from different backgrounds. And, I don't blame them. You've seen the marches, they're huge. I've been marching for Palestine for 20 years. I've never seen anything like it. And every month there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. I suspect Saturday's march will be really big because of all the Palestine Action arrests.
So just for me to understand, so this demonstration, what happens coming Saturday, happens every single month?
They have been having them. They were having them every 2 weeks at one point when the Gaza genocide was happening in real time, as opposed to, you know what I mean, when it was in its full force. But they're still having them about once a month. Yeah. So there's one on Saturday. And so this group of people called Palestine Action are fed up, and I don't blame them. We were going on these demonstrations at the time had been going on them for months, on every 2 weeks or something. They were huge, and the government just dug its heels in. They were still sending drone equipment and surveillance flights and training Israelis and, giving them money, selling arms and also providing aid. And these young people went, it's not enough. We've done all the demonstrating. We've done things your way kind of thing. Now we're going to do something more. We're going to step up the campaign. There were a couple of older people, but mostly young. And so they started invading these Elbit factories. Now, Elbit is an Israeli arms company that has factories in Britain and their headquarters in Britain. And so these young, in my opinion, courageous. It's a scary thing to do. It's not what I would do, but good on them. They went into these factories and they smashed up the factories.
Smashed up or
smashed them up? That was the last thing they did. So I don't know how many factories they went into, 2 or 3 maybe, and the headquarters, Elbit headquarters. So they smashed up the equipment that makes the arms to go to Israel. But the last action they did, I think, or one of the ones before that caused the prescription as a terrorist, which means they're prescribed as a terrorist organisation.
So they're made illegal. They have been made illegal.
Yeah, illegal. They're prescribed. You can't even say their name. Palestine Action. And if I were to say, and this came back, I support Palestine Action, it's an arrestable offence for which I could face 6 months in prison. So as you can hear, it's like so ridiculous. I've got to the point where I just think, fuck it, But anyway, I went. So I didn't go. Sorry, no. So one of the last actions that really incensed Starmer, our Prime Minister, was they broke in easily to an RAF base and they threw paint on a fighter jet that was doing surveillance flights. And they, I think, filmed themselves kind of parading around in the base, and they weren't caught for quite some time. And so they kind of embarrassed the government, really, that they got in so easily. Interestingly, I noticed that heads haven't rolled, that they got in, but nobody's punished on that. So not that I want them to be, but it's interesting, isn't it? So after that, Yvette Cooper, who was the Home Secretary at the time, put forward a motion in Parliament, and she put that group with 2 other very right-wing, misogynist, disgusting, fascist, very marginalised fascist groups, small fascist groups. And it kind of made it difficult. I mean, the Labor Party were under the whip, obviously, but it made it difficult to vote against prescribing Palestine action, because then you were agreeing that those other two right-wing groups shouldn't be prescribed. But actually, I'd like to think if it were me, there were certainly some people who did vote against the government and lost the whip because of it, actually. Anyway, so they prescribed the group. There was an immediate appeal. They lost the appeal. But when you do that, when you make an act of parliament to prescribe, you have to, evidently, from what I've read, you have to consult with all of the different agencies. And they only consulted with Elbit and I think some Israeli players. And so Amnesty and various other organisations put forward a case that they didn't kind of do due diligence, and that all parties should have been involved. And so they've managed to get this judicial review, which is going on as we're speaking. And outside the judicial review, there is another Defend Our Juries action taking place as we speak. They've probably all been arrested now, so I don't know how many people today. So there was one last Saturday. There was one on Monday, there's one today, there's one in Cardiff on Saturday, there's been all around the country. So in September, by then there had been, I think, two or three Defend Our Jury actions, and each time they'd got bigger and bigger. So the first time it was 25. They got 25 people together the day after the law was passed to see whether the police would enact the law. And they did. And then the next time they had 50 people, then maybe 500. Then in September...
Sorry.
Yeah.
So for me to understand, what do you mean 50, 500 what?
So this has been going on since July.
So they're charged?
Yeah, all charged. All of us have been charged. Yeah, over 2,000 people have been charged under the Terrorism Act.
Okay.
And so the Defend Our Juries were a group that came together. So when Just Stop Oil protesters were being charged, the judge was being given political direction, or the magistrates, to direct the juries to vote on what they heard, the direct evidence, and not to bring in any other greater issues, any context. And so somebody called Trudy, whose last name I've forgotten, who's an amazing woman, she stood outside a court with a sign saying, "You have the right as a jury member to vote with your conscience," which is actually outside every courthouse in the land is a plaque saying the same thing. And she got arrested. So then this group of people came called Defend Our Juries to support the Just Stop Oil. And then what happened, and to support the Palestine Action people. And so eventually that's become now to support Palestine Action. So what they did was the day after the law was prescribed, they asked 25 people or 24 people, because the 24 people who were put away for the climate action, the Filton, well, they were 18, now there's 24. So they asked for the same number of people as the arrestees under the Filton action, who you've probably heard about, I think. Sorry, it gets very complicated, but they asked them to come and see whether the police would enact the law that had just been passed and arrest people for holding up a sign saying, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." And they did. The police came and arrested them. So then the Defend Our Juries put a call out for more people to come and more people. And by September, I was itching. And I thought, I just feel I really hesitated because I'm still working. And I'm going to retire next year, but I am still working. And I did think long and hard, because I haven't ever wanted to get arrested, but now I could see that's part of the whole thing of taking the action, is to get arrested, because you're pushing this ridiculousness of the law. So on the 6th of September, 1,300 people came to sit in Trafalgar Square. And as you said, I usually stand under with this non-group of people. And under a banner that says Holocaust Survivors and Descendants Against Genocide. So they came to witness, and I sat near them, and I heard my name so I had a sign around my neck saying I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor against genocide. And actually, we'd been asked not to wear anything, just to hold up the I oppose genocide and I support Palestine action sign. But I just felt it was really important that people knew I was a Jew, and the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And so I heard my name, and I looked over, and Mark and other people under the banner were saying, Novara Media, I want to do an interview, and then they pointed me out. And so Stephen Methven, I think his name is, came over, and he was asking me, he said, oh, can I interview you? And I said, sure. And he was asking me about my dad. And I was literally in the middle of saying why I felt it was so important for me.
I saw that clip.
Yeah.
Now I get it. I saw that clip.
That's what I was doing. And then...
So you were mid-interview, you were basically arrested.
Yeah. And so then I was arrested, and I thought, I'm not going to do it again. I've made my point. I got lots of a voice out there for a different Jewish viewpoint. There have been quite a few Jewish people arrested, maybe not so many, maybe 4 or 5 descendants of Holocaust survivors. Yeah, you need to.
If this conversation stirred something in you, maybe a question that won't quiet down, maybe an uneasy feeling you can't quite name, great, that's the point. So don't scroll past it, follow it, see where the echoes lead. And you can find them in my archives on YouTube and on Substack. There you find the threads connecting what the headlines keep apart: politics, propaganda, psychology, and power. Go there if you're done consuming and ready to start seeing. Because understanding the present always begins with recognizing how the past keeps rewriting the script.